we look at one of the most ruthless UK criminal gangs to ever exist in the UK criminal underworld. The Tottenham Mandem, TMD, or Mandem crew, who were formerly known as Frontliners or Tottenham Boys, were an organised street gang based in Tottenham, North London. The gang began on the Broadwater Farm estate, prior to the Broadwater Farm riot in 1985. One of the early members and later leader, Mark Lambie, was a suspect in the murder of PC Keith Blakelock during that riot. Mr. Lambie had been top of Operation Trident's wanted list for some time, due to the close links he had built with gangs in Wembley, Harlesden and South London. He was jailed in 2002. During the 90s, TMD was one of the largest gangs in northeast London and controlled much of the drug markets in the area. In the early 2000s, members of TMD formed the North Star record label and music group. The group was active in the music scene at the time, and acted as promoters for So Solid Crew. TMD also declined during this period, instead splintering off into various independent groups such as NPK Northumberland Park Gang, Tiverton Mandem, and Chestnut Estate, CE, also known as Black Gang, although some still used the Tottenham Mandem name. Some younger members of TMD began to associate with the London Bloods, and used names such as Ida Boys, also known as Ida Riders, Ida Bloodstars, or Ida, and Bloodline or Blood Gang, whereas some older members began to use the name Star Gang. Collectively, everyone from the Broadwater Farm estate began to be referred to as Farm Mandem, FMD. Some of these groups, such as Star Gang, became active in the road rap scene at the time. Two members of Star Gang, Heads, now known as Pt1, and Young RV, now known as RV, later became prominent in the UK drill music scene, and formed the UK drill collective OFB, Original Farm Boys. TMD, like many other London gangs such as the Peckham Boys and Ghetto Boys, has its origins in the 1970s, and was founded in Broadwater Farm, Tottenham. By the time of the infamous Broadwater Farm riot in 1985, the gang was firmly established in the area. The gang is a derivative of another local gang, known as the Broadwater Farm Posse, and was formed in the 1970s, by black British youth of West Indian origins. TMD originally went by the name Frontliners, then later Tottenham Boys, then finally Tottenham Mandem. By the early 1990s, TMD was one of the largest gangs in northeast London, controlling many of the drug markets in the area. One leader of TMD, Mark Lambie, was also known as the Devil Man, the Obeah Man, or the Prince of Darkness. He was a suspect in the murder of PC Keith Blakelock during the Broadwater Farm riot. Mr. Lambie helped forge links and alliances with gangs across London and beyond. In 1991, he was sentenced to 3.5 years in jail due to involvement in a gang shooting, although this was reduced to a year upon appeal. In 1995, police intelligence reports indicated he had been fraternizing with gang members from Brent and Notting Hill. He also had a feud with Jerome Maddox, who had experienced a drive-by shooting at his home, and was murdered a year later in Jamaica. In 1996, police believed Mark and an associate, Clifford Angle, may have been involved in the non-fatal shooting of Kenneth Wow, in West London. The following year, 3 gunmen entered a Caribbean restaurant in West London called The Place to Be, and asked to see Mark. While it is suspected Mark Lambie was there at the time, he kept quiet if he was. Instead, 2 innocent Marks were shot, after identifying themselves. Police suspected this may have been an attempted retaliation shooting, following the shooting of Kenneth Wow. 6 months later, Kenneth Wow was shot dead. Mark and Clifford were promptly arrested, but let go due to lack of evidence. A few days later, Clifford Angle was shot dead. In 1999, a man was shot in the Coliseum nightclub, in Vauxhall. The victim named Mark Lambie as the shooter, whom was then arrested by police, but once again was let go after the victim withdrew his evidence. In the same year, police believed he and an associate, Michael Thomas, aka Mallet, had shot at an EQ nightclub in Hackney Marsh. Police suspected this was a form of blackmail. There was a third incident at a Hackney club, where Stephen Grant was shot dead. Police suspected this was a part of the TMD and Hackney boys' dispute. Mr. Lambie was suspected of being at the club. By 2000, Mark Lambie was considered untouchable by the local black community. Some people in the local community believed he was capable of juju powers, and was untouchable due to magic. This earned him the nickname Obia Man, named after an African spiritual system. He was top of Operation Trident's wanted list, due to the close links he had built with gangs in Wembley, Harlesden in Brent, and South London. While Trident struggled to find evidence to convict Lambie, they managed to convict two of his associates, Michael Thomas, aka Mallet, and Ricky Sweeney. In order to prevent his girlfriend from testifying against him, Ricky Sweeney had her shot. She was also shot while on a visit to Jamaica. Ultimately she survived, and aided police in testifying against Ricky. Ricky was jailed for life for an execution he took part in 1999. Police were also struggling because they did not actually know where Mark Lambie was, or where he lived, which made traditional methods of gathering information on someone somewhat difficult. Instead, police used similar tactics American police used when going after Al Capone, by going after his associates. Police also found that Mark was living in South London, rather than north as was expected, and that he was using false names, such as Paul Gordon. Eventually, they managed to find him and his brother, Wesley Lambie, in a car that was suspected to be stolen, although the owner refused to testify it was. They also found heroin in the car, but were unable to link it to the Lambie brothers. Although they were unable to bring charges, knowing where he was made surveillance now a possibility. In 2002, Mark Lambie, along with Anthony Blueborn, member of the North London gang The Firm, were jailed after the kidnapping, blackmailing, and torture of two men, Mr. Smith and Mr. Morris, from Tottenham on the 21st of April 2001. The police had been following Lambie around Tottenham on the day, and saw him enter and leave Broadwater Estate. It was considered too risky to enter the estate, so they waited outside until Mark left, and followed him to a party. Nothing eventful happened, so they returned to the police station. What they didn't know is that an associate of Mark, Anthony Bourne, had lured two men into Broadwater Estate, where they were kidnapped at gunpoint by at least 14 people. The two men had driven a blue sports car into the estate, which the police had spotted earlier as they were following Mark. The group took the two men into a house, which they burst into, and ordered the current occupants, 2 women and 2 children, to move downstairs, and then began to torture the 2 men, demanding money from them both. The house they had entered was the same house the police had seen Mark enter earlier in the day, which the police had interpreted to be a party. They were hit with hammers, burned with an electric iron, and had boiling water poured onto their genitals. One of the victims, Mr. Smith, was able to escape after suggesting there was money at a nearby salon. He was bundled into a car, and driven to the salon, which was promptly robbed while Mr. Smith was secured in the boot of the car. While the suspects were inside the salon, Mr. Smith was able to escape from the car and ran to the nearby police station. After his escape, the gang began to flee. They took Mr. Morris outside but were seen by a passing police car. The gang fled, and Mr. Morris ran towards a police car he had spotted passing by and lunged onto the bonnet asking for help. 2 other members of the gang that were involved in the incident, Warren Leader and Francis Osei, were also convicted of kidnapping and blackmail. Warren Leader was released in 2009, but in 2013 he was jailed for 16 years for running a heroin factory. In October 2003, Gavin Smith was killed in Lordship Recreation Ground. Mark Duggan, the member of TMD offshoot Star Gang, was arrested on suspicion of the murder. He was released without charge.